Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our new lesson for today. In this video, we'll talk about fundamentals that are useful for all stages of the game, from opening to middle game and down to the end game. Today, we'll talk about candidate moves and imbalances. Candidate moves refer to the moves you will analyze that carry out a particular goal or plan. When you're playing a game, you can't be expected to analyze every possibility. To avoid this fate, you have to trim back your options by looking at and trying to make use of the imbalances on the board. It's like considering only the vital few from the trivial many to be more efficient in your chess decisions. But what are imbalances? Imbalances are any difference or differences in respective positions. They may be material, space, pawn or square weaknesses, lead in development, piece placement, and king safety. Actually, there are many more, but we'll dig into these more common elements. By taking notes of these imbalances in any situation, you can often come up with a logical plan based on making use of the positive features in your positions. Candidate moves will then be easy to find. Let's take at this position. This position is an easy one to read. Center is closed. White has more queen-size space. Superior minor pieces placement. Look at black's bishops. Black's bishops are not happy in the closed position. And the pressure against the weakness on a6, which is actually an isolated pawn. Since the majority of white's pieces are aimed at the queen side, and since white has space advantage in that area, and ready-made target on this a6 isolated pawn weakness, any moves he wishes to look at should have something to do with these facts. The only candidate moves worth looking at would be rook f to a1, which actually gives pressure or additional pressure into this a6 pawn. Another is queen to e2, and that is also a good move right there. It brings also more pressure to bear against that a6. And another one is knight to a4 with a target of going to b6, a weak square in there. Bring the horse to a greater square on that b6. Once white has listed his candidate moves, he would analyze all of them and play the one that he thinks best. This game is transitioning to Endgame. Obviously, white owns the material advantage and better king placement. Actually, his king is closer to the center than black's. So the candidate moves will then be surround, or obviously will be coming from this list of positive features for white. We know for a fact that if we have the material advantage, trading pieces would be the best way to go. And that is to mitigate the opponent's chances for counterplays and bothersome perpetual checks. We also know that in the endgame, king activity is key to winning. You see, in the opening and middle game, we put our king into safety, but in endgame like this, the king is a fighting piece. So white's candidate moves will probably be rook takes g6, that's one. That's to exchange the material, and followed by knight to f4 and take on the bishop on e6. Another good move is still knight to f4. Now, knight to f4 is still a good idea, capturing the bishop on e6 and forcing this rook to move away or capture our own rook. Now, white player will assess which of these moves are actually better. Perhaps rook takes g6 first would be the better one. After all the minor pieces are gone, white will have an easy game by his queenside pawn push right there. This majority of queenside pawns are worth pushing and will outnumber these two pawns right there for black. Pushing those pawns forward and luring the enemy king towards that side of the board will then allow white's king to prey on this helpless f6 pawn and win the game. In this next position, material is equal, but black can take pride of his outside pawn right there on a6, or sorry, a7 rather. More active king is also noted here for black, because his king is closer to the center than white. And the fact that his opponent's knight, if you notice this knight right here, on a6 is paralyzed. The control of this bishop on the jumping posts or squares where the knight is going to is significant. Now, black weighs down his options based on these factors. Here, white can actually safely capitalize on his advantages or pluses without totally ignoring white's own advantages. The pawn storm that is coming to, this kingside part of the board. Based on these imbalances, black's candidate moves would be king to d5. That's a good move right there to consider. And trying to get closer to a6 knight. If this king moves here, this knight is trapped and going to be meeting his doom. Black can even, consider to play h5 first. Right. Playing h5 first it will make it harder for white to create counterplates in the king side. From those vital few candidate moves, black will go to a long way with his advantage. And in fact, what happens in this game is that black actually won this knight over and win the game. This game offers pluses and minuses from both sides. Black has the extra pawn, but that's not going to matter right now. White leads in development and finds his opponent's king still in the center. These factors outweigh black's extra pawn. From those pluses that really matter right now, white will capitalize. White will choose from the candidate moves knight to g5, which is actually a good move. After knight to g5, knight to e5 is the only way to defend this f7 pawn. But after rook e1, forcing the exchange of queens, and then knight f2 d7, knight takes f7 is mass slaughter for white. So let's go back. Another way to play or a candidate move to consider for white is rook e1, because after bishop to e7 and queen to e2, the king is stuck in the center, and it's going to be a bad way to end for black. Another way to play for white is queen to b3, which actually gives an extra pressure to this f7 pawn, and then rook e1 afterwards, still making this king vulnerable and exposed at the center. Again, note that all of those candidate options have something to do with imbalances that favor white. So imagine if you've been able to identify all those factors, all those imbalances on the board, and make your plans according to them, you'll have a long way to go with the advantage. This next position, white's pluses are more active pieces in the form of strong pressure here in this diagonal, this b1 to h7 diagonal. A knight can even jump to c4 and d6 at some point. And another imbalance is a potential dark square weakness right here. Now, this will then be followed by a strong knight c4 to d6 at some point right there, right? But here, notice how white capitalized on this potential dark square weakness. Because upon identifying these imbalances and favors or advantages, white will have something to do to capitalize and make black force the exchange of the dark square bishop, which is the main defender of the e7 dark square bishop right now. Okay, so bishop to a3 forces the exchange because after, for example, the bishop is gone, knight will go to c4 and d6 and have a superior control at the center of the board. Another way to consider for white or an imbalance in terms of this strong control of this diagonal right here is h5, which actually makes this kingside pawn softer. So take note that all of these candidate moves are again almost automatic and easier to find as we identify the imbalances in our favor. And also I have to mention right here that f4 to f5 is also a good candidate move worth considering at some point. This game is something we can appreciate more about candidate moves and imbalance. Now, let me ask you a question. What is the strength of white's position? What moves will exploit black's weaknesses? Can you pause the video and indicate how the play should go? Okay, black is looking to attack white's king at the center, right? Now, that king is badly defended, and that's the imbalance in the favor of black. While for white, his pawns here, right, in this king side, hold the enemy king in a grip, and the weakness on f6 and g7 indicate an attack by either knight to e4 at some point and queen to e5. Now, these are real candidate moves right there. In fact, the game continued d6. Now, d6 first, so that knight to e4, knight to e4 will not leave this d5 pawn undefended, right? So d6 has been played, and knight takes f5, knight to e4, knight takes e3 check, queen takes e3, and then queen to a4 to force an exchange of queens, and after b3, queen d4 check, queen takes queen, c takes queen, knight f6 check, king has to move to h8, d7, rook to d8, and what happens next? Now, what happens next is that white wins the game because this king is going to march towards the e7 square via capturing this d4 pawn. I hope you'll learn a lot, something from this video today. I want to leave a simple tip right here. In most positions when it comes to candidate moves and imbalances, you should not have more than 3 or 4 candidate moves to choose from. So go ahead and apply this to your games.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.